Today on CityCast Chicago, depending on who you ask, you'll probably get a completely different take on Lakeview. Some people go for the bars and the nightlife. Some go for the cubbies and some for the family-friendly options. We're sitting down with a longtime Lakeview resident to get their unique guide to the neighborhood. It's Thursday, January 19th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is CityCast Chicago. I am sitting here with Joel Simon, a CityCast listener at Heritage Bikes and Coffee in Lakeview for another round of our Neighborhood Guide series. Joel, welcome to CityCast.
Thank you. Welcome to Lakeview.
As far as I know, Lakeview's boundaries are to the south, Diversey. To the west, Ravenswood.
Correct.
To the north. Now, it gets a little choppy here because of the way
So it's mostly Irving Park, but then it jogs up to about 4,200 north. So there's a little sort of finger that sticks up on the west side of the area.
And then the east side border is pretty easy, and that is
Lake Michigan.
Exactly. What is your story in Lakeview, Joel? How long have you been in the neighborhood?
So I've had 2 Lakeview stints. My first time living in Chicago proper was in the northeast part of the community back in 1993, 4. So a good long time ago. So I spent about a year there, then moved around. I was in Avondale, I was in Ukrainian Village, I was in Woodlawn, and then I moved up here now in fall of 2000. So I've been here ever since then, so a good long time.
So what is it about Lakeview that, has kind of captured you for the last 20 plus years?
Yeah, well, so I actually moved here by accident. I didn't think Lakeview was going to be for me. I was going to be in maybe what at the time was maybe a little cooler neighborhood. But I've kind of found a house by accident, and to my surprise, I could afford it. So moved in and then started having kids. So when we moved in, it was restaurants and bars, and lived sort of near Wrigley Field, and I would go when somebody threw a ticket my way, but I never really went out of my way to be there. But great transit. Right, so by several bus lines and L lines, not too far from the lake, and then just a family kind of area. And so I had 2 kids, and they've both grown up right here in Lakeview, and they've enjoyed being city kids. I didn't have that when I was a kid. It's very walkable. You bump into people you know, or people that you see enough that you feel like you should know them, so you say hi even though you never knew their names, and just a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah. I'm from the opposite end of the red line. I'm talking 87th Street, 95th Street, where it ends. And so my understanding of Lakeview, to be honest, when I was a kid, I thought Wrigley was like in a suburb.
Right.
And at one point, Lakeview was a suburb.
Yep.
And by one point, we mean like 1888.
Well, before that, it was celery farmers that lived here. So then it became a suburb, I think, annexed in maybe 1889 or 90 or so.
And so, for somebody like myself from that part of the red line, what would you say is how you would describe Lakeview from somebody who lives on the outside of it? Because, a neighborhood like this has got a lot of different smaller communities, but also a lot of, stereotypes.
Right. There's a lot of people that moved to the neighborhood because they had been to a Cubs game and, hey, I want to be in Chicago. And so there's a lot of folks that are in that maybe, early 20s set who still have that mindset. A lot of them leave. They might go to a further out neighborhood. They might go to the suburbs. They might go back to Indiana or Missouri or where they were from or wherever they're going. So that's not uncommon at all. And a lot of people fell in love with it and stick around. They like the amenities. They like the transit. They like the vibe.
Do you see that? Does that create tension in the neighborhood at all?
So the club scene and Wrigley Field and all that, this stuff was here before most of us moved in. And so you buy the ticket, you take the ride, you know what you're getting yourself into. And either you can deal with it or you can't. Every once in a while, somebody's going to grumble about traffic or parking or whatever. But if that was going to be a problem, you choose somewhere else, right? It's all a trade-off. And we choose to put up with that stuff because of the other benefits. So I think it's pretty rare that people grumble about it for too long before they realize, hey, nobody's listening, and they're going to find what they need somewhere else.
When we think about the neighborhood guide, we often break it down into things to do, things to see, things to eat, and Lakeview has a lot of those. What are some things to do, particularly that have sort of stayed the test of time over the last 20 years that you've been able to do in 2000 and you can still enjoy in 2022
well,
or 2023?
The lake's not going anywhere, right? And so when I was younger, the lake was about riding my bike and going to the beach and drinking beer and whatever else. And then the kids come along like, oh my gosh, there's all these playgrounds. Never noticed them before. Never had to find them. Never looked for them. There's a golf course out there right off of Waveland. So that's sort of number one. I think when it comes to things to do, certainly, bars and restaurants and theaters. The Annoyance theater is right there on Belmont. That was fun. Still is fun, just maybe not for kids. Schubas, right, is a great spot for live music and events and things like that. And a lot of those places also have afternoon stuff for the younger set. And so some of those places may be the same when you're 25 or when you're 45, but you realize they can deliver, and they do deliver different things for the different demographics in the community. When I first moved to the neighborhood, understanding the nature of what is the LGBTQ community, and places like Sidetracks or Berlin, which were places that I'd never really thought about before, but hey, there's a whole sort of category there.
North Halsted and the presence of the LGBTQ community, which again, even before you moved here, dating back to the 50s, is something that this, around Belmont Harbor, that this community has celebrated and been known for. How have you seen that grown just in your time living in this neighborhood?
Just understanding that this is a safe place when back then the world wasn't as safe, and a lot of places weren't as safe for that community. I think in general, greater acceptance broadly has occurred. So I think where people might have once felt, hey, I can be safe in this neighborhood and not somewhere else, those boundaries have expanded. What's also happened is that maybe same-sex couples who got married and they became the double income, no kid demographic had more buying power, and so the rents and the home prices have gone up, as they have in other places, but that's one force that's in this neighborhood that maybe isn't as strong in other neighborhoods. We also have in the neighborhood the Center on Halsted, right, which is a community center for the LGBTQ community, not necessarily just the Boys Town North Halsted community. And so it does attract people from elsewhere in the city. And let's face it, it's a pretty white community, and then all of a sudden there's folks showing up who maybe don't look like the people who live there, and maybe don't have the same income demographic, and there has been a little bit of friction there. I think for the most part, folks are handling it reasonably well.
Yeah, it's always interesting when I read about the neighborhoods and the history in the city, and so often you hear in Lakeview, that maybe people of color, queer people of color, black and brown, young people not feeling as welcomed in the neighborhood. Have you seen the racial demographics in this neighborhood shift in even small ways over your time here?
I wouldn't say that I've seen that shift. I wouldn't say that I've seen the diversity racially and economically advance very well. And that's one of my disappointments. I wish that this community were more accessible to people of a wider income stream, and I think we are missing that. And I think that's largely a function of economics.
We talked about a few things to do, everything from the lake to taking in the art scene. What about some things to see in the neighborhood, whether it's local monuments, local murals, or even some of your favorite things to walk by?
Yeah, so new on the lakefront is the AIDS Memorial Garden, right? It's just came, they've been working on it for a while. I think it was finished just this past summer, and there's a ginormous statue of a Keith Haring image, and again ties to the community just west of Lakeshore Drive and memorializes what was really a tough time for members of that community. So I love that spot. Also nearby is the totem pole that sits at Addison and the lake. The original totem pole was built for the 1893 World's Fair. Then it deteriorated, and then it got sent back to British Columbia, and a descendant of the original carver made a new one for us, and it's there, and it's much better maintained. So that's a favorite lakefront landmark.
What are just some of those classic memories when you think about Lakeview, whether it was a show, whether it was a a party or a bar you went to? What are some of the things that stick out to you?
Well, my wife and I had our first date at the Lincoln Tap.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean that's really all there is to tell. Actually, that's not 100% true. We were together at a party, and then we met, and then peeled off, and we went to Cody's, which is a great little bar at Paulina and Barry. They got bocce ball in the back, and darts out on the back porch and grills. And then the first real date that wasn't just peeling off from the party, we went to Lincoln Tap. So that was just wonderful. And so it's a old school sort of Chicago bar. So that's certainly a great memory. Trick or treating with my kids in the neighborhood, right up and down Lincoln Avenue. All the merchants would come out and give treats for the kids, and if it was a bar, there might be a shot for mom and dad. And then getting to know the theater scene in Chicago, which is of course incredible. The theater building, Belmont and Racine. Now it's the home of Theater Wit. Really sort of terrific place. Number one, to see live theater up close.
Theater wits. I saw Fences there.
Right.
And like to have that happening like 4 feet away from you was absolutely
And
beautiful.
a place where Chicago actors can start and get on to a stage. And there's enough stages and there's enough performances happening that you can get there. And so, you go to any of those shows and you wonder, okay, who's going to be at the Goodman next month and who's going to be on Broadway the week 2 months after that, and 5 years later you're going to see them in the movies, or maybe not, right? But it's all part of that
You'll
kind of
see him
activity.
somewhere on Chicago PD getting
Right.
rolled into a hospital.
Got to mention the Music Box. It is a treasure. It was a movie theater up on Southport, built one of the early movie theaters built for pictures with sound, right? So post-silent movie era. And you go in there, and it's art house films and classic films, and they'll do sing-alongs with Sound of Music. And if you look up on 2 theaters, there's a little one and a big one. And the big one, if you look up on the ceiling, there's little stars in the ceiling, and sometimes they even have an organ player in there. Really old school movie house vibe. Really a unique place in the world, in Chicago too.
Of course, with these guys, we want to bring people to the neighborhood so that they can experience the things that are here. But this is always a cool opportunity for me to learn, especially somebody who's been here so long. What's no longer here that you miss?
Like everywhere else, there's just a lot more chain restaurants and stores than there were before, right? The area around Wrigley during my first stint here, it had that bro kind of vibe to it, but it was its own thing. You go there now, and they've imported, Big Star from Wicker Park, or Smoke Daddy, or Jenny's Ice Cream, or whatever. Those are all great places too, and they do good stuff, but it's no longer unique to Wrigley. And there was a funny Reader article a number of years ago when that transformation was happening, when the Ricketts were really trying to change the neighborhood. The headline, or the thesis of the article, was something along the lines of, who'd have thought I would have preferred the frat boy scene to the regurgitated
To the
and
Gallagher way.
revamped, so whatever. Hey, Big Star tacos are delicious no matter where you eat them. So
Facts. So let's get into that next category. Things to eat in the neighborhood, and this can not only be restaurants. This could be places to get dessert. So where's some places to eat that you love in this neighborhood?
All right, well, we'll start at breakfast. And so I'm a bit of a bagel purist. So a real honest-to-goodness bagel from Steingold's.
Okay.
And they are delicious and crusty and chewy, and they'll give you the cream cheese and lox, and it's really just sort of a classic option there. And it's hard to get good bagels in Chicago, believe it or not. And so that's one place where you can get a legit bagel in
What if
Chicago.
I'm looking for a bigger plate with a couple extra sides, with some breakfast meat?
Okay, well, so for the classic stuff, we got a bunch of great, just straight up diners. S&G, which is right by the Athenaeum Theater, another theater.
Oh, I love the Athenaeum.
Down on Lincoln Avenue in Wellington, and across the street from there is the Golden Apple. Just old school, stick to your ribs, diner food. If you want an interesting breakfast, something a little more unusual, you go to Gundis. Right, Gundis is further down Lincoln Avenue. It is, as far as I know, the only Kurdish restaurant in Chicago, and frankly, the only Kurdish restaurant I've ever seen anywhere in the country. But the breakfast there is just this whole array of cheeses and jams and honey and bread and olives, and it's just a little bit different. Then they'll serve you an omelet with some unusual ingredients in it as well. So there's some really good breakfast, and Gundis has great dinners as well. So,
Beautiful. What else you got for me?
if we've eaten breakfast and gotten through lunch and dinner, maybe it's time to have a drink. All right, so up in that little finger that sticks up on the northwest side of the community is Koval Distillery. They said it was, when it opened a number of years ago, the first legal distillery in Chicago post-prohibition. There's others now, but it was the first. And you can get delicious rye or bourbon, but then they also have some interesting stuff there. So they have like an oat whiskey, which I'd never seen anywhere else. I don't know if I'm drinking it every day, but it's good for a change up. They have a millet whiskey. And then also on that same rough stretch of Lincoln Avenue, a real classic spot, I'll send you to the Paulina Meat Market. Right now, it's not on Paulina. It used to be, but then they moved it. But if you count the time that they were on Paulina, I want to say it's been there probably 60, 70 years.
Oh, wow.
And it's just a classic old school butcher shop, right? It's not a grocery store. It's
My
not a
mom loves
fine
a good
food
meat
store. It
market.
is a butcher shop. And you walk by in the morning, you can smell them smoking the sausages, and they've done a beautiful job of maintaining that old school feel, but also just evolving, right? So they added beer and wine a couple of years ago. Try to avoid going like right before Easter or right before Thanksgiving, because there is a line down the street because people get in their specialty items for their special occasions.
Yeah, you've given us so many great things to look at and to think about today across the neighborhood. So one of my last questions to you, Joe, what do you want people who live outside the neighborhood to know about it and the reason they should maybe come take a visit?
Real people live here, right? It's not just baseball fans. It's not just people going clubbing. Real people, real families with real jobs. And we got pocket parks like everybody else. We got corner restaurants and bars that people like to go to and get a lot of joy from. So every neighborhood's got that. There's also, every time you look, there's a new spot hopping up. Maybe it'll last, maybe it won't. But that's just part of the give and take and the good part of neighborhood change. We got a lot of bad parts. We got stuff that people get excluded from. And so that's real too. And that's part of our experience as Chicagoans, no matter where you live, and we've got our own version of it. But the opportunity to be out and about, to bump into people who you know by accident, to see people you don't know, but over and over again, you feel like they're part of your neighborhood. That's, I think, a special part of being a Chicagoan, and that's a special part of living in Lakeview.
I appreciate you joining us here, Joe. Thank you for reaching out to us here at CityCast Chicago to show us your neighborhood. It means a lot to us.
Well, it is truly a pleasure. Thanks for coming to Lakeview. Thanks for having me on, and can't wait to hear about everybody else's neighborhood.
Before I let you go, a little bit of news, y'all. As expected, legal challenges to the state's ban on designated assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and switches are starting to roll in, including from the Illinois State Rifle Association. While the heat is picking up heading into next month's election, for at least 10 alder people, mostly incumbents, they're running unopposed according to the Daily Line. Do you know who is running in your ward? Check the link in the show notes for the Chicago Board of Elections' complete list of current candidates. Today, the Bulls are on the road against the Pistons, but they not in Detroit. At 3 p.m., watch them face off live from Paris, France. And some good news to get you through. Chicago Restaurant Week kicks off tonight with the First Bites Bash at the Field Museum, and for the next 2 weeks, you can enjoy meals and deals from over 350 participating restaurants across the city. I got more info for you in the show notes. As always, we appreciate you for listening. If you got a little bit of time left and you love CityCast Chicago as much as me, then please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to us. Go on, give us 5 stars and write something quick like, Jacoby, you're the young voice of a city, of a generation. Something like that. I'm going to talk to you tomorrow. We're back with a couple of our favorite voices breaking down stories from the week. See you then. Peace. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this ain't even did the date. What you talking about? That's what you missing. You ain't did the date. You ain't did the date, boy. You ain't hit the date yet. What you doing? From the top.